Well, welcome. Tonight we have an old friend visiting that everybody's wondering what's going on in his life. So if somebody doesn't know you, Dick, why don't we start with an introduction?
Well, first, don't make it such an emphasis on old. You know, not that old. Well, actually, my wife's been very happy to have me home in January and February and part of March.
To shovel?
To shovel snow. And she's gotten to the point now where it doesn't look like we're going to get any more at least this part of the year. So it's time to get out and
So when they
do
start
something
signing
productive.
you up for all those committees that you realize they want you.
Oh yeah, well she said no more volunteer jobs. They've done quite a few of them. We're just still doing some of them, but something that actually provides some compensation would be nice too. So, and I've been looking at some opportunities in that regard, primarily kind of in the health-related healthcare field, and I've done a little bit of kind of not as a full-time consultant, but a few small consulting projects that where I could be helpful. And I can't. Not that I would have any particular interest in lobbying, but I can't lobby the legislature for a year. I can lobby the executive branch if I were so inclined. I really don't know that that's my personality, and I think I would. Unless I really believed in something, and I couldn't just do it because they're paying me to do it.
Because of paycheck?
It just wouldn't be.
Some of those paychecks, I mean, I figure if Hillary can get, was it $250 for an hour seminar? Dr. Moore should get a lot more than that.
Well, I don't know about more than that. I think maybe
you'd settle.
Maybe a fraction of that, but that'd be nice. But I think it's she's there not only because she has something to say that's relevant and substantive, but because she is before a couple of days ago. She was still a very prominent person, and now she's a candidate, of course, for president. So she's not.
We'll talk about her later. We want to hear about you. So supposedly, you get to 70, and you're supposed to slow down. You know, it's this whole retirement, taking it easy thing. And yet I look, and every third day you're out being honored for something.
Well,
okay, Joanne, did you sign him up for anything?
Well, she goes along with me because she, of course, was part of the team as we were going through the House and the Senate and in between. And it's very thoughtful and nice that different organizations do want to recognize the service that I provided. Probably the most prominent one was the Worcester Telegram, the Visions Award program. They get the Public Service Award, which was a very nice event and a nice award that they put on at Mechanics Hall with several other folks that were recognized with various, for being an academic scholar, for being a community service activity, volunteering, and
It's a pretty small number, Dick.
Yeah,
there's exclusive group.
5 awards that were given out. There's the Isaiah Thomas Award, not the basketball player, the Revolutionary War journalist from Worcester. And that's kind of the one for the, you've done the most over time for Worcester and primarily for Worcester. But actually the one that I received, the Public Service Award, I think I'm the first person who was a legislator who received it. There's one current representative, but wasn't a representative at the time, Mary Key from Worcester, who got it for some of her community service activity back probably 10 years ago. Jeannie McMurray from Uxbridge got it 2 years ago. She runs the Worcester County Food Bank, for instance. So they have recognized a lot of community-oriented, and I guess I would be community-oriented too, but having been involved with multiple communities. But
I was going to say, being the architect of some of the most cutting-edge medical legislation, I would think that's pretty nice feather to have in one's bonnet.
And I suppose one option, which I still have somewhere on the horizon, is to actually write something about it. Dr. Julian Harris, who used to be our state Medicaid director, now is in the White House in the Office of Management and Budget on health issues, has when he was here and even since, it encouraged me to think about writing a book about the health reform movement, at least in our state, which did have, to some degree, national implications.
But that led the nation. I mean,
It was
we were a
before,
microcosm,
yeah.
but essentially what the nation went through or is still going through.
And I think, you know, that gets debated a lot. It has been ever since it, well, even before it passed the Congress, and it's a very contentious issue, the way it's been framed. And it's interesting when they've done polling on it, when they ask, are you for the Affordable Care Act? Oh, the majority thinks that's a wonderful thing. But when you say, are you for
Obamacare, it's an immediate negative.
No, and it's the same thing, the same act. It's just that it got a pejorative name.
But you know, I saw an interview of Chris Christie, you know, and Matt Lauer's trying to get him to admit whether he'll run for presidency or not. And he asked him 5 quick questions and wanted his reaction. When he said Obamacare in 2 years, he said, repealed, replaced. I mean, is that like the 54th try?
I think it's more than that. I think they're up to about 60, at least in the House. The Senate, now that they've had a Republican majority, I would expect they'll start doing it too. But I don't think, first of all, I don't think we should repeal it. We might fix it. But it is actually, the time it was implemented, and it was really, even though it passed a year or so before, at the beginning of 2011, we had an 18% uninsured population. It's now down to 11.9%. And that's without this, only 28 states that are fully involved that did the Medicaid expansion as well. So if the rest of those states actually did Medicaid expansion, the uninsured rate would be even less. Now, there have been problems with it, and I think part of the reason there were more problems with the federal plan than with the state is that because of the political nature of Washington in particular, when it was passed in the Senate, and the House at the time was Democrat too, although very close, the Speaker determined that they'd better simply accept the Senate plan rather than try to do their own, or they'd never get a bill out and never get a conference committee to resolve it. So they took it with some admitted flaws and some warts and all in order to get a plan done. And then nobody has been able to come to agreement. The Democrats know there's some things that they agree should be fixed, but the Republicans only want to repeal it, really. And I think you need an option. If you're not going to have that particular law, you need something for health care, because it's a huge thing. We have there are 16 other countries with whom we compete economically that have longer life expectancy than Americans do. And you know, in the country that's really essentially the richest in the world, although we put a lot on the charge account, but the richest in the world, that we should have a very good health system too.
But Dick, the thing I never understood, when we say we don't insure everybody, if somebody without insurance was sick and they showed up at the hospital, I don't believe for a moment Jeff Hopkins or anybody would turn them away.
No, both for 2 reasons. One is that they trained to try to
that Hippocratic thing, you know, that Hippocratic oath kind of gets in the way of doing it.
And even though it's not always the first thing that some doctors think about, but it certainly is there. And the law says you can't. You have to, if somebody comes to the emergency department, you got to treat them, whether they're a citizen or not, or whether they've got money or not. That's that's going to happen. The problem is they're not required to fix everything. They're required to stop the emergency. Stabilize them. And if there's some other operation that's needed, they're not required to do that. Now, sometimes they will as part of their charitable mission, but they.
But somehow, what I saw you sculpting was a system that said, rather than wait until an indication is chronic,
right,
let's make it so you can go to a primary care physician
yeah,
and take care of the cold and not deal with the pneumonia.
Well, and that's the whole point, and it's a part of the federal law as well, is to do more primary care, to really to deal with it at, when it's a relatively minor thing, or particularly, and it's clearly something that now is part of the Medicare law, which is part of that reform. Senior citizens, if you're on Medicare, so you're over 65, you're entitled to a free physical once a year. Now, in that free physical, the doctor has the opportunity to find some things that might be going on, or to find conditions that, if they left not fixed, not corrected, could become much worse. We've seen actually in this state, we've seen a benefit for people to provide smoking cessation benefits. We've seen immediate results from heart attacks and strokes being reduced within the same year, and lung cancer will be affected by it, reduced by it over time, but that takes more to develop. But it's and so, you know, given that some of the benefits of the federal act, especially for senior citizens, you know, the other thing that's a big one for seniors is that the so-called donut hole of the Medicare Part D is going to be closing, and it is closing now, and when will, I think by 2020, I think is the final turn the key time. And that's a huge benefit for seniors who take usually more than one medication. And that will be so that with the seniors are not going to be happy, you know, if they really understand and learn what's involved there. And when you think that we have, for the last 3 to 4 years, 10,000 people every day in the country turn 65, the baby boom generation, and that's going to continue for the next 16 or 17 years, and then it'll taper off a bit. But that, and the group that's the biggest group growing is the 85-year-olds plus, and those folks, many of them do need, you know, they did things as they're getting older that they shouldn't have done, or things that they should have done with their own personal health. And some of which can be reversed, like the smoking thing, can be largely reversed if the cancer hasn't started. There are things you can do to get better.
This is where I get in trouble with the red side of our constituency. Babies and grandmas. How can you vote against taking care of kids and your grandparents? To do away with the health. You know, and I look at Social Security, $1,500, some people less, some people a little more, a month. If you're not covered with your medications, that donut hole could eat you alive.
It's been the source of bankruptcy for a number of individuals and families. So.
But then what do you say to your grandmother? Sorry, you can't have your heart meds? You know, you can't have your blood pressure meds?
Well, we had a governor's candidate a few years back, actually remember the Democratic candidate too, who cited what some of the Eskimos supposedly do, put the elderly person on the iceberg and
float them away.
Float them away. I don't think we're probably likely to do that, or certainly I would hope we wouldn't.
Wait a minute, let's be a little self-centered here, Dick. At my age, I don't want to hear about putting old men on icebergs and floating them away. You know, that's getting too close to home here.
And given the numbers, in fact, there was a headline story in the Telegram and Gazette a couple of days ago about the growth in central Massachusetts of the senior citizens. They are going to be increasingly a political force. They already are, because they as a bloc tend to vote much more regularly than just about any other age group. But they're going to be even more of a factor. Because they're the numbers keep multiplying, and they're all going to be paying attention to it. At the end
of the day, my mom, I'll be personal, she's 91. Okay, she spent her entire life dedicated to my father and I. Really doesn't seem like I'm doing a lot more than what I should do. Forget the law, forget all the noise. This is my mother. It's our grandmothers.
Sure. Well, and many families, some still do, but many families in our lifetime, when a person got elderly, they would oftentimes take them into their home, or they'd do something to try to be helpful to them. And more and more, as sometimes both spouses work, kids sometimes are working and stuff, so there's not always folks around the house to help doing that caregiving, especially if it's very substantive. So there are some great programs. There's one that doesn't get a lot of attention because the federal government says you can't really go out and market it, but there's one that I was involved in developing here called Senior Care Options. There's another version of it that's PACE program that stands for something. And but they are for people who are both frail and poor. So they're elderly, frail, and there's a segment of it that's for people with disabilities too, of younger age. And it coordinates the programs with Medicare and Medicaid. Actually provides the physicians or the other primary care providers with a little better rate than they would get if it was just a Medicaid patient. And they will make sure that the person gets to their doctor's appointment, which is oftentimes a big complaint by physicians that with the Medicaid population, they don't always show up, and so of course they book multiple patients, but they try to do that because they have people that
cancellation rate is so high,
and they cancel without telling people. They just don't show up, and then they forgot or whatever it was, and so it's really something that will get you there. If you don't have a transportation, they'll arrange transportation. So it's really kind of a total care. However, they also provide dental benefits, which Medicaid doesn't. So for people, and there's only about 25% of the eligible people, and the number of that eligibility keeps growing, who are in one of those programs. We've got at least one, I think two, that service the greater Milford area. And so there is something that people who are on Medicaid and if they're elderly Medicare or if they're disabled Medicare really should be thinking about.
Well, we have programs like the Blair House.
Mm-hmm.
Mother Galino has such an incredible program down there.
Well, and Blair House and several of the other long-term care facilities in the area do adult day health, which was
That's
one
my
that
mom. We bring her at 8.
It almost got wiped out about 3 or 4 years ago. The Patrick administration was going to defund it. And every elderly person that I think you could think of showed up at the hearing, and so they backed down. But it's a great program because if you can keep people in their homes, one is the individual likes it better to be home. They feel much more comfortable, and their privacy gets continued. And but from the health standpoint, it's good too. But it's very cost effective because the cost to go into a skilled nursing facility, if you're on Medicaid,
12 to 14 grand a month.
Yeah, and that adds up pretty fast.
I mean, you sit there and say, for my mother, I'm so blessed. I'm married to a saint because when my dad passed away 27 years ago, it was like not even a question. Sharon said, we were in Washington at the time, you can't let your mother be in Milford. She will wither. Being alone, because I have no siblings, it's not who she is. So she moved in 27 years ago, and now today, Sharon works full-time.
Yep.
I work full-time. It's hard because in the last year or so, Mom really shouldn't be left alone. She won't admit she's 91, so if you leave her home, she'll try and go out in the garden, and she herniated 4 discs raking. She'll fall down a step and she broke her. It's just so much easier on the family that at 8 o'clock we take her down to the Blair House. Now we're fortunate because my daughter teaches. So at 4 o'clock she picks up Grandma, brings her to her house, and then 5:30 or so, one of us picks Grandma up.
And the Blair House and I think all these other facilities do go out and pick them up too.
They even have a van. They'll go get them.
And that does a number of things. One is that during the day, they can socialize with other people their age and with the staff. They get at least one good meal that's nutritious during the day. And Blair House actually has a very good culinary arts program. And there are professionals there that kind of look at them. Are they slipping a little, or is it?
Sure.
So whatever. So from a physical standpoint, if there's issues there, they can alert their primary care provider or in the family to take a look at that. So it's been very beneficial to a lot of people. They've been able to. It postpones at least, and sometimes eliminates, nursing home care. And we're not growing many nursing homes. It's been the reimbursement, if you're on Medicaid, is not really generous. It covers basically the basics, but without some of the private pay folks.
Well, I was going to say, if you listen to Barry, you know, you can't call it geriatric authority anymore, the countryside.
No, countryside, yeah.
But the people who come in for rehab and all pay a much higher rate, and that covers what Medicaid and Medicare does.
We're fortunate in this area, not only with a great community hospital in Milford, but and now two in the area, but a community health center, the Edward M. Kennedy Health Center, just across the street from the studio here. Plus, UMass has doctors' facilities down here in this area, so they have that. But also the skilled nursing facilities, and there are several of them, including the Milford. One, the Milford Geriatric Authority owns Countryside. The town of Milford technically does. We're fortunate to have those facilities in the area for rehab, for one, or for longer term, if needed. And we've had off and on, there's some that have been in existence that let things like quality slip a little bit. But I would say for the most part, they do pretty well. The quality's decent. The staff is pretty responsible.
Yeah, Dick, could any place be improved? Probably, no matter how good you are. Yeah. But when I bring my mom there, you know, and you've got a couple of the young ladies that come running out, big smiles, hi Julia, you know, it's like they make it so easy for her to be there for the day.
Yeah, and I've had the occasion to visit at Blair House and Whitcomb House and Countryside over the course of the last several years. In fact, my last remaining uncle, Jimmy Moore, is a resident of Whitcomb House. Yeah. And he's 90, I think 94. Still stirs them up and causes trouble, and occasionally they take him down to Honeydew, and he stirs up trouble there, and if he can get a good political argument going, he tries to. But they treat it pretty well. Now, there's always a case where there's an exception to the rule where somebody, and sometimes it's not how they're treated, but the individual has issues that are difficult with other residents in the place. We're probably, until there's a cure found or a treatment found for Alzheimer's, we're going to need some kind of facilities like that that have secure
That's probably the most frightening thought, that I would lose my mother's mind. You know, with a little bit of dementia setting in, it's hard now, but there's times we can still talk.
Yeah.
Losing that, I can't imagine what it must be like for the person to be trapped inside of a body.
It's and it can be very frightening to them, and it's very tough on the family too, the caregivers, that because they oftentimes you get to a point where they're not recognized by the person that has the illness, and so that's we're going to need to continue that. But there are a lot of things that we can do to ease the cost without cutting back on services. About 75% of healthcare costs are people with chronic illness, which can be treated. But if it isn't treated, it can become very serious. And some of those folks, not all of them, but some of them have, related to the physical illness, they have some kind of either emotional or mental factors that make it difficult for them to take their meds on time and stuff and watch that. And so one of the things that the state and ultimately nationally they're looking at doing is trying to coordinate that providing people who have chronic conditions to see if there is a mental health issue that needs to be medicated or addressed in some way, so that you're taking care of the physical health and not having that become a more serious factor.
What was your take on this last-minute heroics to get the budget passed? You know, if we don't vote by midnight, we'll cut funding to primary care physicians by 21%.
Well, and actually, they just addressed that one of the few things that everybody was able to pretty much agree on in the Congress.
Red and blue became purple, and they said, we're going to take care of our grandparents.
Yeah, and so they're not going to have that cut take effect, and they've done some other small reforms there to make it
But
worthwhile.
is it possible? I mean, I've talked to so many physicians who say, I can't afford, I could fill my practice with Medicare patients.
They can't, well, like the rates are
Then,
not.
then I'd be broke.
Yeah. No, you need the mix of
Private.
private payers to help out on that. And so those of us that are in private insurance are to some degree subsidizing the
Medicare, Medicaid.
Medicare, Medicaid, and of course we're subsidizing it through taxes.
But if we
as well.
didn't subsidize it, it would come out of our taxes, and we would still, I mean, it feels like right pocket, left pocket logic.
Or it would be a individual family responsibility, which could become very expensive, as well as very time-consuming, and just our lifestyles today don't lend themselves. One of the things that is when we're down, Massachusetts is down to less than 1% of people that are actually uninsured.
Uninsured, yeah.
And because we started earlier than the country did on trying to address that. And one of the things, I read a study, I think it was by the Institute of Medicine recently down in Washington, of folks that are, in order to get an affordable rate, they take a high deductible,
right.
Multiples of thousands of dollars. They get $7,000, $8,000.
I've got like $4,000 deductible on this plan I'm on.
And you probably walk around with that kind of money, but
right.
most people don't.
Married with children, not anymore.
So what happens is when you have that huge deductible, you don't access the insurance very often.
But isn't that the reason they put it in?
Well, there are things you can do. There's a health savings account is one of the forms.
Well, I have my PSA to kind of take the edge off.
And if people, you're saving money on the premium, but put a little of that savings toward that health savings account or whatever it may be, so that if you have to pay down to the deductible, because it counts against the deductible when you spend it, then you get access to the care and ultimately to the insurance. Sure. Now, there was one interesting factor, which is something we've got to look at, I think, nationally and certainly here in Massachusetts, is that those folks that have the large deductibles, while they are postponing care until it becomes unbearable or serious, when they do go to the doctors, because they sometimes have to do it out of pocket because they have the deductible to meet, they don't, if they say, well, you should have an MRI. Well, I don't need an MRI.
I'm not going to pay $1,200 for an MRI.
So we've actually seen there's some things that really aren't necessary. They're good, they're nice to have perhaps, but they're not really necessary for that particular condition that the person has treated. And so we need to figure out how do we educate the consumer, the patient, to be more selective and not just say whatever the doctor says, we got to do this test and that test, but to really know what the test is for and whether it's really required. So that it's going to be perhaps a patient education thing, or maybe have more things that require a check with whoever's paying the bill.
Some of it, Dick, is just discipline, because if you sit there and say, I'm saving $300 a month on a family plan by taking this monstrous deduction, I'm really betting that I'm not going to use $4,000 worth of health care this year. But if I put away $300 as if, and it's always easier to say, but if I put that $300 away as if I was paying it in insurance, at the end of the year, I end up with $3,600 if I use no health care. Mm-hmm. If I really blew it and used a lot of health care, I spent $4,000 on my deductible, it's only a $400 delta.
Yeah, which many people can close that gap, but a lot of people can't. There are a lot of people.
But the scary part is the people who don't put it away, take the high deductible, and then something happens, and all of a sudden you're hit with $4,000 of direct expense.
Yeah, and then they're on GoFundMe.
Yeah.
And which it's nice that program's around. I think it could be abused. And there has been a couple of times of people that didn't really, have a legitimate crisis. So any of the charitable types of activities, you do need to make sure it's for real.
But Dick, it's so easy to pick the one or two look at how bad this is, and to forget the 98.
Sure.
You know, so as much as I hate the idea of tolerating, but maybe it's okay if I help 98 people if one of them got away with some shenanigans.
Well, unfortunately, when those become publicized, then everybody gets hit by the same broad brush, and it sounds like it's everybody doing it. And it's the same thing with welfare and any other programs that they're, you know, when human beings are involved, they can find a way to get around something. Somebody will, and then it gives the bad reputation for the rest of the program.
We just had a family who lost their house, lost everything, you know, and I was so proud, because it's so easy to pick on unions and people, but, you know, you hear that this little girl was going to the prom and her prom dress got burnt, and, you know, the first thing you say is, no, if that really is the problem, we'll find a way. And then you hear the school teachers got together and chipped in. Makes you feel good to be part of the center of the universe here in Milford, that we're not relying on a national program. This is one of us.
Well, I think, you know, a town like Milford and many of the towns in the area, when it is a legitimate cause, people do get together. There's, you know, we've had the program that Tony Brenner and his wife ran for so many years, still going on. They help somebody out. The program, that, thanks to Yanks, that
Mike does and Donnelly.
So there are some programs that will step in when depending on the circumstances, and sometimes it's just you know, somebody gets together and knows the family or something and organizes some kind of a fundraiser. There's some that there's a few that I've heard of lately that have some huge medical bills.
True.
Apparently we're uninsured, and sometimes you can't cover the whole cost, but you know, I
take the sting out of it at least.
Yeah, you can help.
So if Chris Christie said Obamacare in 2 years, you know, defeated, destroyed, whatever silliness, if I looked at Richard Moore and said, the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare in 2 years, where do you see it?
Well, I'm hoping that they fix some of the rough spots that are in it and administer, but I'd like to see more of the states, most of them in the South and Midwest, but more of the states picking up their share, because they actually get some federal, well, from all of us, federal money to help them do it, so that more people get covered by it, because it'll make a healthier country.
How about Massachusetts? Do you see us needing a lot of change to the system?
No, not other than the you know, whatever would change nationally. The one of the areas that I think that affects Massachusetts more than some other states is that some of the funding comes from medical device tax, and we have a lot of medical device manufacturers in the state. So it does hurt some of our local businesses disproportionately. And I'm not sure that should be as prominent a funding source as it is at the moment. I think that needs to be looked at down the line as to how, you know, it should a much broader base tax that our existing taxes would earmarked a piece of it or something needs to be used to fund it. I've actually heard an argument that recently that might well come out in the presidential campaign is to look at, and this was actually for a Democrat proposal, but it could well be some that the Republican would embrace as well, to eliminate the payroll tax, both for the business and for the individual, and fund Social Security through like a carbon tax or some other tax that has a benefit to it, in reducing some other problem, like carbon tax would reduce the emissions in the atmosphere. Because what we're doing is we're taxing work, and work we ought to value work,
right?
And so you know, I think that's something that certainly that we ought to look at and see who's going to be talking about that, if at all, among the candidates. I think, you know, we still don't know who all of the candidates are. We've had people setting up trial balloons and stuff, and even former Governor Bush, Jeb Bush, is not officially in the race yet, but he's...
Let's take a look at that. Let's shift over. The Democrats. I hear one name, and
Well, there's a
One
couple of
governor
others
kind of
looking
sticking
at
his nose up saying,
Yeah,
like whack-a-mole, if I stick my head up, will I get whacked down?
Governor O'Malley is a decent guy. They had a great reputation as mayor of Baltimore and then as governor of Maryland. And in fact, I don't know if there's a couple of TV shows that on and off. There was The District, and there's another one that I can't recall the name. It's I think more recent than that, where they had this. They used kind of a gathering of information and basing how they did pursue crime, and it's a process that can be used in other ways as well. But O'Malley started. He doesn't himself. There was another fellow working for him who came up with the idea of how you do those kind of things, of doing the collecting research on a crime situation or a social situation, and how you respond to it and resolve it. And he's apparently also a pretty good musician and singer. He's going around because we've had a few of those in public life off and on, he's testing the waters. Jim Webb, the former senator of Virginia, who's a veteran, has said he wanted to take a look at it, and so there may be others. I think some of it may have been testing the waters on the assumption that maybe Hillary Clinton would not be a candidate. Obviously, she now has said she will be. She has to develop her message in her campaign because there'll be plenty of people trying to define her in probably less than flattering ways. And there's a whole bunch of folks lining up on the Republican side. It's an important election because there is not one where there's an incumbent. I don't know that, I don't think the vice president is going to get into it, so that there would not be he's been they tested his name in the polls, but I have not heard him say anything about.
That was a whack-a-mole. You know, I sort of heard Biden slam, and then death silence. So I've got to assume that when he stuck his nose up, the powers that be.
Yeah, and he's an interesting guy. Certainly had a very credible reputation in the Senate, but he's got some quirks that sometimes they're humorous at least. But I don't know. I'm not sure that he'll get into it. Although it wouldn't be the first time that a vice president decided to try to take a shot at the top job.
I've been a non-denominational insulter because I brought up, when we did the conservative view, this whole idea of email, you know, that Hillary Clinton, and I said, is it just a smokescreen? Because do I really care what she does with her email? No. But it worries me, you know, from the days of Oklahoma, you know, you go the Whitewater, you go the foundation, all the way up. Is it really that people care about the email, or is it a fundamental question of can we trust this person?
Well, so far none of those issues that were supposed scandals at the time have stuck. The Whitewater didn't. They had a federal prosecutor, a special prosecutor, looking at it and really came up with
Teflon
nothing.
coating has worked.
We spent, you know, the taxpayers spent a lot of money, and hired a lot of people to try to find something wrong there. And they didn't. There was actually a committee controlled by Republican members of the House that looked at the Benghazi situation and could find no culpability on Secretary Clinton's part. So they're great to talk about in this whole email thing.
Is it form or is it substance?
Well, I think the complaint seems to be more form than substance. More.
You know, when I think of Benghazi, I know I could have made the right decision 3 days after it was done.
Yeah.
You know, without a doubt, once I had the data, once I had everything in my possession, I could have made the right decision. Not sure I could have made the right decision in real time, but her voice, you know, the famous quote, what does it matter? It just, to me, that's form. She just doesn't come across as somebody that I can empathize with.
Well, and I think that's why they rolled out the campaign a little differently than they did, 8 years ago, to show more of the personal approach to it, because she is a very compassionate person, very bright person, and who has done a lot for the country as well. She does command big fees when speaking,
Yes.
because she's smart and she knows what she's
Well, I
talking
don't think anybody
about.
could question her intelligence, her effectiveness. But in your mind, is she trustworthy?
I think so.
Okay.
I don't see that being a real issue. I mean, people will try to paint her in one way or another, as others will paint other candidates.
But now we shift over
but I
to
don't
the
think-
other side. Marco Rubio. He came out with a pretty strong stand.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of things. One is that Jeb Bush helped bring him into politics, and it does seem disloyal to go now when he could wait.
Right.
He's not that old. He's got plenty of
First-term senator.
time. Yeah, and people in his party, including probably him, have complained about the
First-term senator that
that's now
didn't
in
have
the White House.
experience running the country. Yes.
He also has taken a position which I don't think is consistent with the majority in the country, including the majority of Hispanics in the country, and that is that we shouldn't be opening up the doors with Cuba. I think there are a lot of the polling that's been done, certainly, but I've heard 2 years ago we had a group of legislators from around the country at the Carter Library and had a chance to meet with former President Carter, who's become a better former president than maybe he was a president.
Maybe.
But
Probably one of the better post-presidents.
One of his complaints about the current administration, the Obama administration, was they hadn't, but he said wasn't just this one, including his own. We didn't try to deal with that presence off our coast, and that his argument was if we had encouraged and allowed Americans to go there regularly, yeah, it would have had some impact on the economy, but it would have made the Cuban people far more familiar with Americans.
Dick, if you really believe in capitalism, then opening the door, well, in my mind, capitalism against communism, capitalism wins.
Yep. And it is in China.
And you sit there and say, if I open the door, it's hard to stop the flood.
Yeah, I think we probably carried on that isolation too long. Whether it was right at the first time, there was obviously some strong feelings, and there's a whole community that came from Cuba that's in Florida, and Senator Rubio's playing to that theme.
Of course.
But that's not the whole country.
But again, you got the same, I remember going to the Soviet Union, and there were stores called the Beryuska. As long as you had hard currency, you could buy what you wanted.
Well, but one of the things that this has done, apart from the issue of trying to ultimately bring Cuba back into more of the family of nations, it is a big factor with our other neighbors to the south.
South America.
In South and Central America, and I went to a couple of meetings of it's called the Parliamentary Conference of the Americas, and it's state and federal legislators from all the countries, Canada, U.S., and then Mexico, South, there. And it was frequently a comment. One is that our national conference state legislatures went periodically when we could afford to do it in the budget. Federal government didn't go there that often. And yet there was always somebody wanting to bring up a resolution condemning the United States for not solving their issues with Cuba. In fact, I was involved in trying to basically massage some words to make sure that there wasn't an attack on the United States at one of the meetings that we had in Quebec. But there was that undertone there. This apart from the probably beneficial economic relationship, and ultimately a far better diplomatic relationship with Cuba and the United States, it will significantly improve our relations with a lot of other countries that we need to solidify.
But again, Dick, I just remember the attitude of the Russian, the other republic citizens, when they knew if you have dollars, you can go in there and buy what you want.
Yep.
And why can't we? You sit there and say, give it time. And I believe capitalism will win.
Over the last probably decade, the restrictions have been eased quite a bit, and I've run into a number of people. I have not yet gone, but a number of people, including Congressman McGovern and others, who have been there multiple times and tried to open that up. And I think we're we're really on the right track, and so I think that's something Rubio's got to come to grips with. That if he's trying to become a national figure, not a local Florida figure or
But
Hispanic
now,
figure.
Cruz, Texas version of Rubio? Do I see much difference?
Both are Tea Party favorites from some of their stands, and I think it's early perhaps for them to articulate their positions, but they do sound a lot alike. And Rand Paul.
Well, hold before we get there, but the one I loved was when Marco comes out and says Hillary was the woman from yesterday, leading us to yesterday, using yesterday's and I'm thinking, saying, okay, now wait a minute. The other guy from Florida.
Was he referring to him too?
Yeah. I mean, how are you going to market Jeb Bush? Is this, hey, this is the better Bush? Yeah. This one's a smart Bush? You know, you had a couple not so pointy tools. This is the sharp tool in the shed. It seemed like a double-edged sword here that, yes, you can paint Hillary as old school. You know what it is. It's pointing backwards, but paint the Bushes as forward?
Well, and when you start saying that particularly about Hillary, the Clinton administration, we had some of the best economy in recent years. In fact, in the second term, the federal deficit turned around. We had a surplus, which got spent in 2 wars after that during the Bush administration.
And continues to be spent in wars now.
Yeah. So if people recall the old days, they might be the good old days. So I don't know how long they want to keep that strategy, that message.
Well, I just can't see how the party can let that strategy get out there.
Well, the problem that having so many candidates who are most of them effective speakers out there is that they're going to start. They have to talk about each other. Yeah. And some of that stuff comes back to haunt them later on in the general election when you're looking at a much broader audience.
Now, you mentioned Rand Paul, and I've asked, I know I got Eddie a little upset when he says, this is the man who's going to save the Republican Party from itself. He does seem to pull from the middle. Mm-hmm. You know, when I think of the traditional blue voter, yes, you know, John Fernandez brought it up when he said, when I win by 10% and I call it a landslide or a real directive from the population, it's because there's a third that'll always vote this way. There's a third that'll always vote that way. Mm-hmm. I'm fighting for the third in the middle. So if I get 20%, I got 2-1. That's a pretty strong mandate. When I think of Rand Paul, I wonder if he wouldn't be a bigger headache for the Democratic Party, because he doesn't seem to be off on the right with Rubio and Cruz and crew. Who knows where Christie is? But you think he's more of a threat?
I don't know yet to see how that's going to play out. I think we're still early in the game. Here we're almost a year away from when it starts to get real serious about who's got the votes for different delegations. It'll start. I mean, they're already visiting New Hampshire and Iowa and other places. Who are those who've at least announced or are seriously exploring.
I absolutely love Governor Christie. Well, I'm not really running. So you went to New Hampshire. Governor, the leaves, we usually look at them in the fall. There's not a lot of leaf.
I don't think he's a skier.
No. So if you're not skiing and you're not looking at leaves, nothing against New Hampshire, but I don't know what well, you're from New Jersey. Any place in New England's got to be a step. Of course, I'm going to now annoy all the people from New Jersey.
Somebody from New Jersey that moved here from New Jersey will probably be
upset. Yeah. Well, then we'll have 8 people. 2 of them will be mad watching.
But it's we will. I think the important thing would be if people really follow it. I'm not sure how many people are paying a lot of attention yet, and maybe won't pay any attention at all. There are still a lot of people who don't seem to care, and yet it's in their own self-interest to care and to to at least know what they're doing and be an informed voter and to vote, which is another thing that a lot of
Well,
people
see, that
don't
was
do.
a funny part, because when I asked, our conservative wing, what happens if the Republican candidate is a more middle-of-the-roader? What happens with the deep red states, all the square states? And I was told, well, they'll stay home, they won't vote.
Yeah.
I said, well, then aren't you voting for Hillary? I mean, let's think about it. If you have Hillary against whoever, Rand Paul or whoever, and you say, well, I don't like either one, I typically vote Republican, I'm not going to vote. Isn't that the Democrats' dream?
Well, and then there's also the other side of it, although I don't know that whether it's as numerous or not, but the more liberal wing of the Democratic Party, who've been pushing Elizabeth Warren as one candidate or some other candidate to address those issues. And we've seen that happen in the past in Democratic primaries, that and it happens in our state, that the party tends to nominate somebody who is, on the Democratic side, very liberal, and it's then hard for them to justify all their positions and stuff to the general public who's not so liberal.
But still, Dick, if I am a very liberal Massachusetts voter, and I've got a Hillary, and I think she's too centralist, I don't like her, I'm going to vote for Ted Cruz?
No, probably not.
I mean, this is the funny part.
But you might not vote.
But
and
aren't I voting for
then you're really throwing
the Republicans?
Yeah, you're helping somebody else.
Because, when I think about it, whether I stop a goal or score a goal, it's a +1 for me. So if I don't vote, then the Republicans essentially, they could end up with 14 votes in the election instead of 12 like they usually get. But it's still a plus for the other candidate.
And so that affects, really both parties. Probably, maybe a little more so the Republican Party than the Democrats, but we've seen that happen a few years back. Probably one of the more qualified candidates for governor was Elliot Richardson, who held like 4 or 5 different cabinet spots in different
He walked around the whole cabinet almost.
And he was running for governor, and he got beat in the Republican primary by Ray Shamey, who was more conservative. And I had heard people say, who had voted, who were conservative and who voted for Shamey, I know he can't win, but I don't want that liberal or moderate Richardson to be. But who do they get? They got Dukakis.
They got Dukakis. Let's think about this one.
Yeah.
So instead of getting this, by staying home, I got that.
Yeah.
Makes no sense to me
So
sometimes.
it's we're seeing where it's still a relatively competitive issue in our state, but there are other states, particularly where, and it's part of the problem in Congress, that some candidates, members of Congress, are elected by this very hardcore element, and if they don't stick with the message. In fact, I remember talking to an Oxford resident, very conservative, former federal employee. In fact, he was involved in a group that's called the Massachusetts Republican Assembly, and on their website it says they're the Republican wing of the Republican Party. And back when Scott Brown was running against Elizabeth Warren or vice versa, I said, Scott was going to be speaking in Worcester, and I said, I suppose you're going up to see your friend Scott Brown speak. He said, well, we're not pleased with him. Because he'd voted a couple of times that were votes that people in Massachusetts would be generally more supportive of, but they were seen as being not conservative. And so for a couple of votes, some people who were conservatives who didn't vote for him. They didn't vote for her either, but they didn't come out to vote. And so it happens in state elections.
You end up with Mike Dukakis then. And I can't think of
well,
one
we ended
conservative.
Up with Elizabeth Warren.
Well, Elizabeth Warren.
Which has got to be.
I was going to say, same thing?
To that voter, I can't imagine he likes what she stood for.
If you look at what Elizabeth Warren stands for, Dukakis, to an ultra-right conservative, I don't know that they can see the wheat from the chaff.
But some of this, the attitude has been there, and I think it's been to some degree with the very liberal wing of the Democratic Party, is we'd rather lose the election than have somebody in our party, theoretically, that isn't really a pure
so we're going to punish our
conservative or
family
liberal.
to make an example.
Yeah, and it doesn't make a lot of sense, but it does happen.
Is some of the stuff going on, you think, personal? I mean, it seems like some of these senators, the word Obama, okay, whatever comes after it, like Obamacare, bad, Affordable Care, okay. Is it gotten?
I think some of it is. I think, unfortunately, some folks oppose Obama because it's a bit of racism. I think some are going to be opposing Hillary because it's women rather than a man, and that we should be past that, I think, in America, but it still will be.
They told me they opposed her because they're scared. She's intelligent, she's very effective, she's very efficient. Okay, but she's a woman?
Yeah.
I mean, I would hope we've grown up.
I don't think, a lot of people won't say that, but that's the underlying feeling.
You know, it just amazes me because you sit there and you say, I have 2 daughters. You know, if anything would change my mind on evaluating somebody for what they're worth and what they do, it's that I want my daughters to be evaluated on who they are, not a gender ceiling. But
well, I mean, we've seen, you know, racial choice. You know, there's the issue with a couple of the candidates on the Republican side being Hispanic, and at some point there probably will be the first Hispanic president of the United States. I don't think this will be the time, but the numbers of Hispanics who are active voters, especially in urban areas, has increased.
If they're American, they're American. And at the end of the day, that is what matters to me. Right. Irish, Portuguese, I mean, Milford's gone through it all. And at the end of the day, we look and say, are you from Milford? Uxbridge is close enough. But thank you for coming.
My pleasure.
As always, thanks to the 6 loyal viewers. I'll say good night, God bless, and stay tuned, because something tells me that this is not going to be your typical fade into the sunset career, that Dick Moore Chapter 2 is just starting.
I hope so.
Not too long since I've been home, been running all my life just